For the lease license agreement, BRT, we're beginning about 6:12 on Tuesday, December 21st, 2010. This is a continuation of an ad hoc committee, and we did receive a planning commission report. It's quite lengthy, so I'd like to ask Mr. Alpern to give us a brief rundown of the planning commission report.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't say everyone who's here. Corporation Counsel, Mr. Pinter, Director of Planning, Mr. Alpern, Director of Finance. Thank you. I went Councilman Fulker, Councilman Joe Cavo, Mayor Boughton, Mr. Bertram, other committee members, Councilman Rotello, and Councilman Taylor. Okay, I'm sorry. And members of the public, press. Mr. Alpern.
Oh, okay. The Planning Commission met on November 3rd, and in there they have several pages, but I'll give you the synopsis. They reiterated their July 27th positive recommendation with conditions as to a lease or license agreement with BRT to land at Crosby Street and Lee Hartel. There are 5 conditions. 1, any such lease or license shall reserve unto the city the right in the future to terminate said lease or license at the city's sole discretion, should it be necessary or desirable to improve the roadway. 2, any such lease or license shall include terms to ensure that BRT remains responsible for the maintenance of all improvements in the leased or licensed area. 3, any lease or license shall include acceptable provisions regarding indemnification. 4, any lease or license shall provide for easement rights, such as drainage and rights to pass, repass, over and across such leased or licensed area. And 5, all such legal documents incorporating the above conditions shall be reviewed and deemed acceptable to the Office of Corporation Counsel. That's it.
And there was also, I can't find the exact place right now, but it also says that for the metered parking, that if those parking spaces were metered, it would not go toward the zoning seating for your restaurant. So I just wanted to make sure we got that on record. Also, Mr. Pinter, do you have anything you would like to add?
The other thing is, Mr. Chairman, that
Sure.
the Planning Commission, one of the things that the committee had asked the Planning Commission to do was to opine on the suitability of the property, the spaces for meters, and they declined to take a position because it's not really something they felt that they need to take a position on. So their recommendation, as Dennis indicated, was a lease or license, both of which would accomplish the purposes of having these spaces counted toward the facilities, the commercial facilities, the retail facilities. So in that context, working with if the committee decides to go this direction and the council accepts that recommendation, we would work with Mr. Bertram and council to draft either document or both, and put in the conditions that are required by the Planning Commission.
Could you please just explain what the difference is between a lease agreement versus a license agreement?
A license is essentially a contract. It provides for an agreement by the parties. It could be in writing or verbally. In this case, it would be in writing, simply stipulating to the use of the property under certain terms and conditions. They would probably be almost the same as a lease would be, except that a license does not require the formalities of a public hearing or other planning commission related approvals, technically, even though we have it here. And it could be adopted and passed quicker because of the lack of need for a public hearing. It could also be terminated more easily. So depending upon the party's interest, one license or lease is more advantageous or less as opposed to the other. The lease agreement, as the council knows, requires the formalities of a certain approval process, planning commission review and approval, and it has the positive effect of permanency. And parties would rely on a lease agreement as an interest in real estate, would be recorded and treated as a conveyance. So one is more permanent nature, the other is less permanent. One has an interest in real estate, the other does not. And the license is essentially a contract. So that's the essential difference. Doing the license route would allow for, again, a more expedited occupancy and use of these facilities. The lease would require a little bit more of a time delay, but would be more permanent. So that's the basis of the difference.
Thank you. Your Honor, do you have anything you would like to say?
I just wanted to, the reason I stopped in was just, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that, we have got to make some decisions about our processes in terms of Main Street. One of the focal points of my State of the City speech on Friday had to do with the ability of the city to be able to react in a very agile way to folks that are willing to invest a significant amount of money into Main Street or the Main Street area. My preference is for a license agreement because that provides a much quicker way to get something going, to be able to get Brugger's Bagels in there quicker than a lease agreement, which requires posting and notification and public hearings, and it'll be April before we can issue a CO to that facility, and be able to actually do something. And I think if we're going to send a message to people on Main Street that we want you to come here and we want you to open your store here, then we've got to be consistent with that message, and we can't then hold people up for really, what I consider to be a sort of picayune reg that we have as it relates to Main Street. We have a lot of value in surrounding areas around Main Street, but I'm just concerned that sometimes we can steal defeat from the jaws of victory. And so having said that, any creative way we can get from point A to point B, I certainly would be supportive.
Mr. Taylor.
Basically, the mayor echoed every point I was going to make, that if we want to encourage development in the spirit of the State of the City address, I think it would be, we'd be sending a message to other people besides Mr. Bertram that we want to encourage development, we want to work with you, we want to expedite the process. We're talking about 4 parking spaces. It seems to me a no-brainer. Thank you.
Mr. St. Hilaire, did you have anything you wanted to add from the financial aspect?
I would just keep it very simple to expedite the process. We do charge a amount per space within the garages down there. You might want to mirror that model. There's been a certain amount of capital investment made. You might want to recognize that as long as it's maintained to the approved specs. You can recognize that investment made by the business owner and then charge a set amount every year that's probably based upon the amount that the garage is going to charge, because that is for the kind of somewhat exclusive use in proximity for that business. That would streamline the whole process.
Mr. Taylor.
Do you know what that charge is off the top of your head?
I think it's like $450 a year. $450, anywhere between
$450 a year. Yeah.
I could be a little high on that.
So you're talking about $1,400,
thereabouts.
up to 4 spaces.
Yeah.
18.
Huh?
1,800, yeah, 4 times 4, 60, 1,800.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear what Mr. Bertram feels.
Sure.
I would like to echo the comments about speed, because we have done everything we can to bring the Bruegers to the spot. We've signed up for 3 of them just to get them to agree to go here, and so we've committed to this. We've also made the improvements, as you've referenced, in the area, and so speed, and it would be nice. It'd be a nice attaboy to have it be nominal in cost, because we have stepped up, but we're in support of anything that we can do quickly.
I just don't recall. How many more seats can you put in, bring these 4 spaces?
It's a multiple of 4, so it's 4 seats per
Per space.
parking
I
space.
have
Okay.
I have this information. As it is now, Mr. Bertram went to the ZBA and asked for a variance on the requirement for on-site parking for employees. I encouraged him to do that because I was in the process at the time of writing the downtown plan, and that was one of the things that we wanted to do, because to me it makes a lot of sense. That the employees could park in a garage and walk to work, leaving open on-site space for customers who don't, as we know, don't like to walk very far in many cases. So he did get that variance. As it stands now, when you add up the numbers, without the 4 spaces, he would have 6 parking spaces which could be used by the bagel shop, which equals 24 restaurant seats. If he got 4 more, the requirement is 1 space for every 4 seats. So he could have 16 more, possibly, which takes us up to 40.
Yeah, it has a major impact in a positive way, for sure.
Mr. Italo, do you have any questions?
Sorry?
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Through the chair to Director Pinder. Les, how defensible, from the Planning Commission's point of view, is this statement that if the 4 parking spaces on city property are solely dedicated to BRT, an additional 6 seats could be allowed within the coffee shop, but if available for the general public, no additional seating would be permitted? I ask because the very fastest way of doing this is to simply put in parking meters. That solves 2 problems. The first problem it solves is we can do it overnight. We'd have them in by next week. The second problem it solves is that it maintains our control over these parking spaces. Well, I don't know where we're going with this intersection. I don't know where the Army Corps of Engineers is going with this intersection. But the flood control remediation was finished in the late 50s or early 1960s, if I'm not mistaken. And I do understand from talking to the Corps that they do have some plans for that intersection. Whether it affects those 4 spaces or not, I don't know. But if we maintain control over them, and Mr. Bertram gets what he wants with his 4 spaces, we get what we need because we've got the flexibility of dealing with this. We don't have to deal with either a license or a lease. We'd be completely opposed to a lease. I'm not even really in favor of a license. But this statement here that he would lose his support for the 16 seats or the 4 tables, yeah, I find somewhat curious. It would seem to me that in a situation like Main Street, where parking is clearly limited, we are tying the hands of every single retail establishment in that corridor if we insist that they have to have dedicated parking spaces. I mean, nobody has dedicated parking spaces. So what's the issue?
We require that they have 5 parking spaces in the garage or permanent spaces on the lot. But this is meter parking. Anyone can park. And not necessarily clients. And that's our concern.
So, Director Pinner, how defensible is that? I mean, does that come from a state statute? Could we simply say that in this case we're going to allow those 4 parking spaces to behave as if they were dedicated? I mean, the practical reason is that nobody else is going to park there. You're not going to go to Subway and park in Mr. Bertram's lot. It's not going to happen. It's too far to go. The only people who are going to park there are going to go to the bagel place or one of the other shops there. So
there's risk there, Paul, because as soon as you put meters in, you're flagging the fact that it's open to others to park. It's not a dedication for that particular operator or owner. What you have then, as soon as you put up the meters, you have some jurisdictional shift to the parking authority. Okay, the parking authority can't make a decision that only certain proprietors or visitors to operators can park there. So you run the risk, no question about it.
that I understand, but where does the Planning Commission's power come to make that determination? That's my question.
The power comes from what we discussed last time. That's why it was sent to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has jurisdiction, some jurisdiction at least, over determining the suitability of the use of property for meters. been around on that, discussed that issue, but because the public act that was adopted and then amended later on.
1957 or something.
1957 and amended in 1984. Again, there's a little bit of disagreement over exactly how it's crafted. However, the conservative approach is to have the Planning Commission weigh in on that, under that act. And the Planning Commission has. They basically said, we're not addressing that issue. But you did ask them for it, and the Planning Commission does have some general jurisdiction over the use of property because they provide the Rate 24 reports. And under that, the general guideline, they have told you that they don't, they didn't say they don't recommend meters, I don't think, but they prefer license and leases because of the general use by the public of these meters. For example, the students in the facility next door, the house next door, can use those parking meters.
I mean, they clearly say this isn't a recommendation, no additional seating. That's a no. That's not,
Right.
in our opinion, they're simply saying no more seating.
Without
if
a
you
doubt,
have
without a doubt, the Planning Commission has said that unless you lease or license it,
There's no
commercial
ambiguity.
will not get those additional seats.
And you think that's defensible?
Yes.
Okay. I have one more question, if I may, Mr. Chair. Mr. Alpern, there's been some talk as it pertains to the Main Street development of the old bank, that the city was interested in expanding the circumference of where allowable parking is, I think, from whatever it is now to, what, 500 feet or something?
500. Yeah.
Would that affect the Bertram parcel? If that is expanded, would that include additional parking so
Well,
that
I don't know where all that discussion's coming from, but it's not coming from my
Okay,
office.
you're not planning on increasing the circumference?
Well, I'm not planning on acting on that.
That's not something
Except
that you're
in the
working
matter
on now?
of employee parking, and I think we have to make a distinction here between employee parking and customer parking. The Patriot Garage is about 800 and some feet from his property. Now, if you work there, you come in the morning, you park your car, and you walk to work. At the end of the day, you walk back to your car. If you're a customer, and we hear this all the time when people complaining about parking downtown, they don't want to walk 10 feet, let alone 800.
You at the health club, right?
Even with that, the dance studio.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we can make an adjustment there, and I think it would work, because it's, and by the way, we need documentation. It's not just taking on the word of the employer, and we have to see the permit. We have to see a copy of the permit that they bought from the parking authority for employees. So there is I think, a big difference between employee parking and customer parking, which needs to be as convenient as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that, condition 1 would address, Councilman, Rotolo's, concern about, we have the right to terminate, the city has the right to terminate
Over here, yeah.
and a leaser license at any time. So I think that would address any issues relating to future development or Corps of Army engineers or something like that, that I think when he's accepting this agreement that he realizes that those parking spaces could be gone in a week or might not be 10 years. But, I think that first, one, gives us the flexibility that we need if there's future improvements from the Army Corps of Engineers, flood control or something else, we have the right to, reuse those spaces. So I think that protects us, in my opinion.
Mr. Sandman?
Yeah, keep in mind that the cost of these meters, to install them, and, it'll take you about 2 years to recover the cost of the meters and to install them. Not to mention the maintenance, just going out and getting the picture engine all right. So, if you're going to be in it for a while, just to break even.
I think, if I may, I think that we understand we're going to be in this for a while. I mean, I don't think anybody is really, contemplating recovering those spaces anytime soon. I would be surprised if it happened in the next 10 years. But it could happen sooner. And if it does, and we didn't prepare ourselves for this eventuality, we're going to find ourselves back in court or back in the negotiating table with another headache that this is going to, tie our hands unnecessarily if there was a way now to avoid that in the future. That's all I'm saying. And the other thing is to respond to Councilman Taylor's point. I think that if I was, I'm just thinking out loud here, perhaps the tenant would be a little reticent about signing on to the deal if he thought the license could be pulled at any time. But I'd leave that up to the landlord on that issue. It may be good for the city, but I mean, if I was a bagel place and I was counting on those extra 16 seats, and I had a pretty weak license, I might question the intent a little bit.
But we have to say one thing straight up is that two things. One is that there is a risk, mostly to Mr. Bertram, that if the city did decide they wanted to realign the intersection, that the absence of the spaces could result, as we saw in Danbury, a relinquishing of certain seating, okay, unless there's replacement parking. The second issue is, and this is an out-of-the-box consideration for the committee to look at, you could have a license for a year, see how it works, and then morph it into a lease, so there's more time to get the lease in place. And in that year's time, everybody sees how it works. We need the intersection. We can examine the permanency a little bit more, and go through the public hearing and all that process, and put a lease in place after a year, so morph it from one to the other. It's not normally done, but it can be done, and it allows occupancy faster, but it provides comfort to the council that, we're not, or everybody, that we're not sitting there with a loose contract. That's another way to go about it.
I think that, from a long-term perspective, I mean, obviously, we're going to figure out what we're get a solution tonight from a long-term perspective, but as businesses are developing on Main Street, how do you want to deal with these kind of things? Do you want to issue a card swipe on the meters to deal with the regular customers, and then have the other customers have to pop and change, so that they don't have, so they can have the convenience of just park and go, versus somebody else that may not have the authorization. That way you can actually authorize people to park in certain areas and not park in other areas because they have a card, and you can issue that authority based upon a card. And you can change that authority at any time in certain areas. That's something that is a totally separate issue. You're not going to resolve that in the short term. But for here, you're really dealing on a unique piece of property. And so, how do we deal with this to allow the parking quickly to resolve this? I think it's important to get this business up and running, keeping in mind the long-term issue, but let's not hold up that because of the important concerns that we have long-term. You're not going to get that resolved in the short term, I think.
President Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First, I'd like to just say that I agree with Mr. Rotello. I think that the intersection and the Army Corps of Engineers is certainly a concern for us, but I also agree that the Planning Commission stipulation about us having the ability to withdraw that at a time so we need to, I think covers us on that, and I agree with Mr. Taylor on that. But what I wanted to do is ask Mr. Pinter, Mr. Pinter, on a license agreement, how will the terms in that work? How would you foresee the terms working in that versus a license agreement that morphs into a lease after a year? Would the license have to be renewable by the council yearly, or could it be set with terms? What I'd like to see happen here tonight, if it is all possible, is us to come out with some type of an agreement to say that, in the February meeting, we'll vote on this. We'll have an agreement in place that we can vote on as a council, just to move this. And if not, find out some way that we can do this where we can give either temporary permission while we're hammering this out to use those spaces. I went by there again today, and there's contractors' trucks everywhere. It's great to see people working. Contractors going to be great to see Burgers Bagels in there, and I'd like to see this kind of move along. So if you could just, I know I just said a lot of things in one breath, but the license agreement, how do we do that? Is it renewable? How is it renewable? Does it have to come back before the council be renewable?
Whatever the committee tells us to do, we'll put in there. A license, you've You've approved licenses, for example, for seating in front of the coffee house on Main Street some years ago. You approved 1 or 2 for planting areas, things like that. So they're very straightforward. You provide a term, you provide a renewal clause if you want one, you provide a license fee. You call it rent and a lease, license fee. You could provide for the provision where in a year's time or 2 years' time you would review and approve a lease by a certain date. You could not put in a date. You could make it very flexible. So there's all kinds of ways to do that. The difference in the documentation would be simply clauses that pertain to real property. You'd have a more careful description of the site if you're doing a lease. You'd have some more renewal clauses in the lease, terms that are more defined, rent as opposed to license fee. So it would be a more structured document. Would we attach a copy of the proposed lease to the license? We could attach it so that people can see it up front, or we could submit it later. If the council in a year's time decides not to go to a lease, then we'll renew the license. The council can renew the license or have it automatically renewed if a lease is not adopted or approved. So depending on what the committee and the council directs us to do, the language crafting is probably the easier part. We'll sit down with Mr. Bertram or council and draft that out. The issue is the temporary nature, which can be done by a license, verbal or otherwise, or permanency, which is the lease. That's the issue that the committee should probably decide first.
And if I may continue through the chair to Mr. Bertram. Mr. Bertram, how many year lease did you sign with Brugger's Bagels, if I may ask?
Well, that's just the nature of this. We're a franchisee, and so we are the tenant and we are the landlord, okay, as they're different legal entities. The franchise agreement is 10 years, though. It is the association with Brugger's, and that's renewable for another 10. But if I may, to follow your comments, I certainly would love to see the January meeting for action. Now, from the standpoint of setting some kind of a precedent, to echo the mayor's comments, from where we sit, we're looking at how can we move something forward. The headwinds are great with the economy as it is right now, and we're simply trying to step off and find a way to move forward. As easy as we can make this, the easier the better, for sure. The license, I would echo everything that was said here. It seems like we could do everything we needed to with a license and move it along. And also have a template there for someone who might step off and need something that maybe they can proceed with a reasonable expectation that it can be done quickly. That's, I think, important to get into the fabric of this.
And the only reason I said skip February is because if you've seen Mr. Pinter's desk lately, adding a license agreement for the January meeting, I think would just be really tough to do for what the workload he has. But I mean, I could see a 10-year license happening tonight, with a renewal in 10 years. And that would be my comments on that.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to, Mr. Bertram didn't say it, but let's just reflect a little bit on the project there. The project is a spin-off of the housing that was put there on Crosby Street. Mr. Bertram, in his defense, took a 99-year lease. A 99-year lease, am I correct? On a building that sat vacant for years. Was an eyesore, broken windows, was one of the worst, arguably one of the worst looking buildings in that little area of the community. He's put in there a Papa John's Pizza, now a Brugger's Bagel, and a dance studio. A significant investment all the way around. Exactly what we're trying to do by putting in housing on Main Street, by spinning off this kind of development. The only person that's investing any significant money, with the exception of Union Savings Bank, on Main Street. And it seems to me having 2 meetings over 4 parking spots is 2 meetings too many. I mean, it's absurd what we're doing here. I'm not, look, I'm not defending Mr. Bertram because he can speak for himself. But from an economic development standpoint, do you understand why people walk away from Main Street? Not you, Madam Chairwoman, but in general. when we have to have ad hoc meeting after ad hoc meeting over 4 parking spots. We shouldn't have any regulations about parking downtown. You want to put a business anywhere in the central city, and which is true, and I know this falls a little bit out of the zone, we shouldn't even be having this discussion. We got a parking garage right around the corner. So, I think that the longer we delay, and the longer we look for reasons not to do this, the Army Corps of Engineers won't be doing any realignment in the next 100 years downtown, based on the state of the federal, based on our own fiscal situation, and based on the state finances. We can throw up roadblocks and throw up ideas why this shouldn't happen, or we can say we're serious about economic development, we're serious about improving that neighborhood, and let's figure out a way to get it done. Mr. Cavo, I actually thought of 5 years with a 5-year renewable, which seems a little bit less, things. But he's in it for 100 years. Not, and he can speak for himself. And, I would say that there were any person that were here tonight trying to invest money. So I just think we got to look big picture here of what happens and how these things get spun around. And now we have to have, planning. It seems absurd. That's all I'm trying to say.
If I could,
I feel better.
Could I follow that for? It's not my nature to say, hey, look at what we're doing, okay? But I would like to throw out, as we went into this building, we were unable to, say, put up a sign for lease and have anything happen. The dance studio will never be able to pay in any economic terms for what the improvements to the space required. But it's such a great use. It'll have such a great feel. We couldn't get any brands to come down, and so we said we will go into the pizza business. We will go into the bagel business. I only say this because I think it's important to say that this isn't just happening. This is kind of brute force. It's done with the hope and expectation, though, that as others come and look at downtown, they say, oh, look, a Brugger's, a Papa John's. Other outside brands are coming into downtown. They're not going to know exactly the story how they got there, but I think that it's a good setup for subsequent investment. And so we're hoping upon hope that these things lead to more in the downtown area. And so, like I say, any help is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Les, is there any way with your workload that if we come to a consensus tonight, that this could be expedited for the January meeting?
I never use excuse of workload to overdo anything. So we can do that. We can do that.
Don, he's volunteered to work this weekend.
Okay. On Saturday and Sunday, both out?
And you?
Every Saturday and Sunday that goes by. When does the agenda close? It's unbelievable.
Next Tuesday.
Well, there you go.
Sure, but I'd like to make a motion with some help from, the committee in West, that we move forward with a motion to work out a 5-year license with a 5-year renewable between, Mr. Pinter and Mr. Bertram to expedite to expedite a license agreement for those 4 parking spaces as soon as possible.
Do you want to include these conditions?
Yes, right. Yes, thank you, Dennis.
We work on these
Yeah,
days, so.
to include the 5 conditions that were given in the positive report from the planning commission. And feel free to add to that motion. I'm a new guy, so I definitely, the mayor echoes my. After the first meeting, I went home and said to my wife, this seems like a lot of hullabaloo over 4 parking spaces that are already paved and just has a yellow ribbon across it for someone who's invested this amount of money, this amount of time, this amount of commitment, that we should expedite it as fast as possible. Feel free to add to that motion whatever needs to be added to make it workable for city regulations.
Yes,
Yeah, I know. I just wanted, I'm not sure whether to ask a procedural question first or after. Do I have to second and then ask procedural? Second. Now,
Discussion.
yeah, I had a question that was...
It's on.
Mr. Pinter,
To sit here for 5 meetings? For parking?
this wouldn't have to come back to committee. You would be able to give it to us in our agenda. And
We could forward it to the full council as the council wishes, or return it to committee, whatever you decide.
okay, President Campbell's arm's going to fall off. So
Madam Chair, I think it's just extremely important that you add a couple of things to this. One is the dollar amount for the spaces and the term of the lease.
Yeah, we hadn't even.
Okay, I just think that that also needs to be part of the
Right,
motion.
I have that all written down. I just wanted to get that. Did you?
Yeah, I heard license and lease. The motion, as I understand it, has a 5-year license, 5-year renewal for the license.
License.
No clause about morphing to a lease at some point between, okay, so just license, okay. I'm clear on that.
Okay, and the amount of the spaces to be added, the price on the spaces, is that what you
$1
wanted?
million per space.
Payable upfront.
The council can put in fair market value where we can obtain
Fair market value.
an evaluation of the
$1 million a
space
space.
through other spaces or through an independent review. I mean,
Fair market.
that's spaces manufacturing. You know, the spaces
I
will
think whatever the garage is getting is where I would aim for that.
They may have a rate for outdoor parking, though, it's not garage.
It's lower than
Yeah, we should
you're
see
covered.
what the parking authority gets.
It is lower. We could look at the deals we signed with Urset Biddle too. Probably all somewhat similar.
And we do have 70 to 80 parking spaces on Kennedy Place.
Okay, more discussion on the motion.
Might add.
You know, I just want to jump in here. First of all, let me echo the mayor's comments. It seems a little silly that we're spending this kind of effort over 4 parking spaces. But in the council's defense, because he kind of took a pot shot at the ad hoc, we're not here because of an ad hoc. We're here because of a 1957 statute over a parking authority that gives power to the planning commission. And our hands are tied. I would have loved to have seen this settled administratively. Dan could have gone to the mayor's office, gotten us 4 parking spaces, and go out to the races. But that didn't happen. So here we are. But my issue is pretty straightforward. We've got a limited amount of parking spaces on Main Street that the city owns. And we're never going to get any more unless we start knocking down some buildings. And to cede control of these parking spaces to satisfy an immediate need of a vendor is, in my opinion, not the direction I want to take the city. And that's why I'm here. I mean, I'm here to represent some constituents, and they've put their trust in me. And I'm looking at this, I'm pulling back a little bit. It would be great to be serving some bagels there at the end of the month. But I would like us to, as we seem to be on the precipice of setting a precedent with downtown Danbury development, to just step back, cool off a little bit, and say, is there another way of doing this? I think that there is. I think we can keep these parking spaces, satisfy the city, satisfy the people who own them, our constituents, and satisfy the landlord. I am not in favor of a lease. I'm not in favor of selling it. I'm not even in favor of this license, and I'm going to be voting against it. But I'm not voting against it as a punitive vote to stop this project from happening. I'd like to see this project happen tomorrow, and I firmly believe by putting in parking meters, we could get this project off the ground in the fastest way possible. And I don't think, in spite of council's learned opinion, that this 1957 statute is all that defensible in terms of where we are. I think the city has a lot more control over its parking spaces than we give the city credit for. We could look at something that David St. Blair mentioned that they use in Northampton, which are smart parking meters. You don't put money in a meter, you get a little chip that allows you to have some flexibility as to where you want to put your car and what you want to use the car for. Obviously, this is long term, but I think we could get some meters in off the bat and take care of his tenant or his landlord-tenant situation. I will be voting against this, but I just want to go on the record. It's not a vote against the project, it's a vote against the process. Thank you.
Any more discussion on the motion? Can we just ask you to run the motion by us one more time to make sure we have, or Mr. Kell, just to make sure we have everything in it that we want in it before?
My notes reflect the motions made, Mr. Chairman, was to prepare and submit a 5-year license agreement with a 5-year renewal period with conditions as required in the Planning Commission report. Add a license fee rate that is now being charged for non-garage parking spaces.
Is that agreeable with me? Thank you, Les.
Okay.
Okay, any more discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
One in favor, one opposed.
2 in favor.
I'm sorry, 2 in favor, 1 opposed. Sorry, it's a couple days before Christmas.
Okay, get it done.
Okay, motion to
business.
adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
3 in favor.
Unanimous on adjournment.
Well,